Hello, my name's Sophie and welcome to another day of Vlogmas. We're so close to the end, but today I'm going to tier rank every single book I read this year. I've spent so long pulling in all the pictures and putting them in the right order so that I can correspond with my Storygraph ratings, blah blah blah. You don't want to hear about that. You want to get into the gossip and see which books I rated absolute trash in my opinion and which books I would rate as absolute perfection. Tattoo these words on my forehead. So let's just jump right into it. The categories are relatively simple. I'm just going to correspond them to the star rating I gave them. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. A separate section for 6-star books because I feel like they deserve shouting about. I'm not just going to be dragging and dropping them into the section that corresponds to what I rated them. I'm going to be ranking them within those ratings as well. So this might get a bit long. Let's just get started. The first book I read this year was Russian Roulette, which is book 10 in the Alex Rider series, and according to my Storygraph I rated this 4 stars. Honestly, I think by this point, even though it was only the beginning of the year, I was on book 10 in the Alex Rider series, and there's 3 more of them down here and I can't really remember the difference between them. However, I think this is one that actually wasn't about Alex Rider. I think it was about a kind of recurring enemy who was a Russian spy, kind of turned not spy, started working for evil mafia people. I don't know. I think that was the book about him. It was really interesting to read from his perspective about growing up in Russia, how he fell into his life as it ended up being, and how he fell into step with Alex Rider and how their lives kept crossing. I did actually find that one really, really good. Hence the 4-star rating. But as it's the first book on the graph, there's nothing more exciting to say. The next book I read was my first book club book of the year, and that's Enna Burning by Shannon Hale. It's the second book in the Books of Bayern series, and obviously I haven't read book 1 because this is a book that we received as a wedding gift, and here's the TLDR on the wedding library because I feel like I have to say it every time just in case like this is the first of my videos you've watched. But if that's the case, when my husband and I got married, instead of having a gift list, we asked our guests to gift us a copy of their favourite book. So we have a little collection of our favourite people's favourite books, and in an endeavour to read them all, we take it in turns to pick one each month, and I read it and he doesn't. So I started with my oldest friend's book choice, which was Enna Burning by Shannon Hale, but I think I've put it on my list that I would like to read book 1 in this series and then come back to it because I think I would rate it more highly if I understood the context more. That's gone at number 3. We've not got to the interesting bit yet, but the next book I read I did also rate at 3 stars, and that's Never Say Die, which is the book 11 in the Alex Rider series by Anthony Horowitz. And I think this is one that disappointed me as Alex Rider goes, considering I was on my 11th book in the series. I was clearly invested at this point. I wasn't hate reading it, I wasn't reluctantly reading it for the sake of finishing a series, because this is an unfinished series. A new book came out in 2023 that I haven't read yet. But I thought this one was just a bit bland. Nothing really happened. So that's 3 stars. It definitely didn't enjoy it as much as Enna Burning, so it's going after Enna Burning. The next book was, I was getting so close to the end of Alex Rider at this point, and that was Secret Weapon, which is listed as 11.5, but on the spine it says book 12. But this is a collection of 7 short stories which take part at various points throughout the series. I think it's hard to rate a collection of short stories because obviously each story is its own entity, so it's hard to give the overall book a rating, but generally I rated the series 4 stars, so I rated this one 4 stars as well. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as Russian Roulette just because it was 7 short stories, so there wasn't as much to get into. We're on to the last Alex Rider book that was out when I was reading these, and that's Nightshade, and I rated this a full 5 stars, and even nearly a year on, because I read this in January, I stand by that rating. I thought Nightshade was really clever. It had got to the point where obviously by book 12, and being a teenager who just wants to be a teenager, Alex Rider as a character was kind of sick of the way he was being treated by everyone, and he's called in for kind of one last mission. It's just brilliant. I thought the whole setup was really, really clever. The fact that they brought back an old character that was presumed dead was really interesting. Nightshade as a kind of villainous antagonist was really, really well done and really interesting. And I said when I finished this that this was absolutely set up for a sequel, and the sequel has now come out. It's called Nightshade Revenge, and I need to read it. That's my first 5-star read of the year, and I stand by it. You'll be glad to know I'm done talking about Alex Rider now. Next up, I read Good Omens, which I rated 3 stars, and I'm definitely going to put it above Enna Burning. I definitely did enjoy it more than Enna Burning and Never Say Die, but I found the narrative style a little bit overwhelming. I found the pacing quite strange. I found the way that characters were introduced and connected to each other was a bit weird. Yeah, I mostly wanted to read this book so that I could watch the show, and I haven't done that yet either. Yeah, I don't think it was badly written, I just didn't personally engage with it particularly well. I am intrigued enough about the story to watch the show. So that's all I'll say about Good Omens. Then to finish off January, I read 7 books in January, which is a lot for me. I read We Just Clicked by Annabelle, and I also rated that 3 stars. I'm gonna put it after, no I'm not, I'm gonna put it above Good Omens because it was a contemporary romance. It was a social media based contemporary romance, if I remember correctly. I think it was a social media fake dating based romance, but rather than her ending up with the person she was fake dating, it was fairly obvious from the beginning she was going to end up with someone else. But it was an easy read, it was a really light read. I think I ended up inadvertently staying up till 3 AM to finish it. And then we get to a book which I think I initially rated 4 stars, and then the more I talked about it and like reviewed it on TikTok and Storygraph and Instagram or whatever, I took it down to 2 stars. And that's One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, which is, I love Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and we will come to that later. So I really expected to love One Last Stop, but I just didn't like the protagonist. The story was a bit convoluted. The whole thing with the woman out of time on the subway could have been cool, but then I think they tried to apply science to it and it completely lost me. I stopped trying to understand it, and I just didn't care for these characters in any way, shape or form. And I think I felt obliged to rate it higher initially because I love Casey McQuiston's writing in Red, White and Royal Blue, so I felt obliged to like it, but I just didn't. So 2 stars, there it is. But at least after that I listened to an audiobook that I absolutely adored, and that's the second book after The Kiss Quotient, The Bride Test by Helen Huang. And this, it goes straight in the 5-star category. It goes above Nightshade. I love this contemporary romance series, not just because it's a contemporary romance, but because it's a contemporary romance with fantastic autism representation. It's also got really good cultural representation. The main character, both of the main characters in this one specifically, are Vietnamese, and I got a little insight into Vietnamese culture, and it's something I really enjoy reading about. I think writing about culture in a romantic fictional way is a really good way for me to learn. I really enjoyed the characters, I loved the story, I just loved everything about it. If you've been watching all of my Vlogmas videos, you'll know by now that I love the series with my entire heart and soul, and we'll be getting to the heart and soul of that in a little bit. I'm gonna have to reread that series this year because it just brought me so much joy. Then it was my February book club pick. My husband picked Ready Player One, which was another 5-star read that I am going to put above Nightshade. The thing about Ready Player One is that it really took me by surprise that I enjoyed it so much. It wasn't just a 5-star read, it was a 5-star read that I really didn't anticipate in giving 5 stars. I thought the world building was insane. I thought it was so believable. It was genuinely, if someone told me this is the future, I would absolutely believe it. Yeah, the whole thing felt so realistic, and I thought the video game element was really, really fun. Yeah, I had a fantastic time, to the degree that I immediately went out and bought Ready Player 2, which is the next book I finished, and I rated it 4 stars, but I don't remember rating it 4 stars. I only remember the things that I didn't like about it, because obviously these books, I read them at the beginning of 2023, so I'm a good 10-11 months removed from having read them. I rated it 4 stars. I think probably because the world building is still really, really solid. I think it takes quite a considerable time jump from the first one. The ending was quite sweet. if a bit unbelievable, which, considering how immersive I found the world building in the first book, the fact that the ending of the second book was completely unbelievable just doesn't make sense. Yeah, the plot was a bit samey. I didn't really see what the point was, but there must have been something engaging about it, otherwise I would have rated it lower than 4 stars. But Ready Player 2 is definitely one of my most disappointing books of 2023. I think this is why quite a few YouTubers will make videos about books that disappointed them, because it's not necessarily about the books that they rated the lowest or the books they didn't enjoy. It's the books that they went into with a huge sense of anticipation, and then the book didn't live up to that anticipation, and that's what Ready Player 2 was for me. But then we get into my first 6-star read of the year. I finished this was the first book I finished in March. It was an audiobook, and it is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. There she goes in her 6-star absolute perfection, tattoo these words on my forehead. It's the 3rd book in the Kiss Quotient series of interconnected standalones. Anna is a freshly diagnosed autistic protagonist who's in her late 20s, if not early 30s, I think late 20s, and hasn't even considered that she may be autistic until her therapist kind of diagnoses her and gives her a bunch of resources on it. And it's about her journey going through a really terrible time in her life whilst also trying to figure out who she is with this new element of her identity that isn't new, but it is discovering a new part of herself and realising how much of how she functions makes sense now that she knows this part about her. And then we kind of go from 6-star absolute perfection to a book that again really disappointed me. I read The Atlas 6 and I rated it 3 stars, and honestly I'm going to put it below Never Say Die because again I think this is one that if the hype wasn't so huge for The Atlas 6 I probably would have rated it. I don't know if I'd have rated it higher, but I would have been less disappointed. I was so excited to read about a kind of dark academia, magic based school, kind of not school system. The whole 6 people are invited, only 5 can be initiated thing sounded really exciting. I think what is missing from all of the descriptions about this book is that it definitely has a literary genre to it. It's a little bit pretentious in its writing, and I know some people like that. Some people love that kind of style, but I personally don't. So I found it really difficult to follow. It was the absolute epitome of all vibes, no plot, and I don't generally get on with that because I'm like, nothing is happening, and I'm so bored. It took me a really long time to read because I just felt like nothing was happening and I was really bored. I kind of liked 1 or 2 of the characters, but all of their relationships between all of them, both the romantic and the friendship relationships, felt really wishy-washy. A lot of it felt completely glossed over. I felt like I was watching from 10 rows back and I didn't get to be involved in the story in any way whatsoever. And then I read the follow-up, The Atlas Paradox, and felt much the same. The Atlas Paradox to me very much felt like second book syndrome. There was slightly more plot in this one. I can vaguely remember slightly more plot happening, and annoyingly it was intriguing enough that I want to read the Atlas Complex when that comes out, but I'm going to have to reread the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox first, and I'm not really excited about it. I'm bordering into hate reading category, but I know that everyone's going to be talking about it when it comes out and I'm gonna feel FOMO. However, they're not going to stay at the bottom for long, because the next book I read was my March book club and I picked Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick, which I rated at 3 stars and I'm definitely putting at the bottom of the pile. I was talking about this in a video recently, and I was saying that if I'd read this book as a teenager and I had the nostalgic attachment to it, I definitely would rate it higher, but because I don't have that nostalgic attachment to it, all the things that I would forgive if I had that nostalgia for it, I just don't forgive. It was your stereotypical YA fantasy romance, insta love, no explanation of context as to why they like each other. There was a fallen angel element, and the kind of laws and rules around that were a little bit convoluted, but it was intriguing enough that I then bought the rest of the series on my Kindle. So it was one of those where I was reluctantly intrigued and I knew I wouldn't quite be able to settle until I'd read them all, but we'll get to that. We will get to that. At least after Hush Hush, I read a book that I really love. I reread The Innocent Story by Nikki Singer, which I have frequently said is my favourite book of all time. I first read this book, I think, when I was about 10, so maybe 17 years ago, at least 15 years ago. And I loved it then, and I wanted to reread it because I'd been listing it as one of my favourite books of all time, and I felt like I wasn't sure whether it still was, so I wanted to reread it to double check, and I gobbled it up. I absolutely loved it. It's a complicated one to explain because when I say it's about a teenage girl, I don't even think she's a teenager, I think she's 12. It's about a 12-year-old girl who gets blown up by a suicide bomber who somehow doesn't die, and she kind of comes back to life, for want of a better word, as a ball of mist that lives in other people's brains, called a paraspirit, and she ends up in the brain of the guy that killed her. And that sounds quite messed up as a concept, but it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see the perspective on death from a 12-year-old girl, and how she lost her little sister in the whole thing as well. It's just really interesting. I absolutely adore it. I wish more people knew about this book and read this book. It's 100% a 6-star book, and it has been a 6-star book for me for a very long time now. We really are flip-flopping with the ratings at the moment, because the next book I read is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El Motar. I'm so bad at pronouncing names, I'm so sorry. And I've rated this one 3 stars, but honestly, I think I'm going to put it above Hush Hush but below The Atlas Paradox. It was definitely another literary book that doesn't say that it's a literary book. All plot, all vibes, no plot. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't feel invested in the characters in any way whatsoever, and I was so confused by the hype. I was so excited to read a sci-fi book about time travel and these 2 queer lovers writing letters to each other from across the universe, but it just felt so surface level, and I think that's what literary fiction is, but I just can't get on board with it. It just didn't make any sense, and in hindsight, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it a 2-star book. I'm even going to change my review on Storygraph. The next book I finished was an audiobook, and that was A Dead Dedication by Naomi Novik, which is the first book in the Scholarmance series, and I rated this 4 stars. I'm putting it above Actually, I'm putting it above all of those. It was very much a setup book. I think more highly of it now that I've finished the series than I did at the time. I think I found the protagonist a bit annoying at the beginning, and then there was a turning point whilst I was listening to the book where I realised that was the point, that Elle as a protagonist wasn't meant to be a likeable character. She was meant to be a kind of anti-hero. Yeah, Deadly Education was the dark academia I wanted from the Atlas 6 that I didn't get. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a great setup for the future books in the series, and they will be making an appearance, so we'll come back to that. The next book on my list is The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, which is a adult historical fiction romance-ish story that I think I picked up in Tesco's because it had the word stars in the title, and I am a space girly, and I was like, ah, stars! It was really not what I expected it to be at all, but in a good way. I really enjoyed it. I thought the kind of feminist take on women doing what they wanted and getting what they wanted in a time where a lot of people really did not respect women the way they should was really well written. I really enjoyed it, and I rated it 4 stars. I think I'm going to put it above Russian Roulette just because I felt more emotionally invested. I think because the Alex Rider series is a middle grade book about a teenage boy, there's not a ton of emotional involvement in it, and I do tend to enjoy books that really tug on my heartstrings and make me feel emotionally involved in the stories. The Curious Incident, The Dog in the Nighttime, easy peasy, 2 stars. I'm going to put it above This Is How... No, I'm not. This is where it gets tough, because I can understand that it was technically as good as, if not better, than This Is How You Lose the Time War, but this book makes me angry, so I am going to put it at the bottom of the list, sorry. The thing that makes me angry about this book is that Mark Haddon as an author has clearly written an autistic character. There is no way that he did not intend for Christopher to be autistic. He tried to get himself out of criticism for writing an autistic character badly by saying I didn't want him to be autistic, and openly admitting that he didn't put any research into it and he didn't want to label him as autistic, and kind of distancing himself from autism. I really didn't enjoy it. I will never be reading it again. 2 stars. I only gave it 2 stars because I can appreciate how it is not technically badly written. We'll get to the books that are technically badly written, but this isn't one of them. But at least after that, I read a contemporary romance that I thoroughly enjoyed. I listened to the audiobook for Icebreaker, which I rated 4 stars, and I'm going to put it above Alex Rider but below The Giver of Stars, because it was just an easy contemporary romance. There wasn't a ton of plot going on. There was a couple of attempts, but it was very surface level. It was just a smutty sports romance, and it did exactly what it said on the tin, and it did it well, and I enjoyed it. I cared about the characters, I liked their relationship, I liked the peripheral characters. I love how it's set up for a series of interconnected standalones, which we will come back to because I read the sequel later in the year. Then we come back to the Scholomance series because I picked up a physical copy of The Last Graduate and I read that, and I also rated it 4 stars. And I'm actually going to put it above A Deadly Education because I enjoyed The Last Graduate more. I think partially because I didn't listen to it as an audiobook. Because I was reading it physically, I could read it at my own pace and kind of give the characters their own voices, and I just enjoyed it more. I just really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun. It built on everything that had been established in the first book and gave it more character. It was more emotional. The peripheral characters became more important. The whole main plot was really interesting, and the ending was so tense, so high-paced. Words are not my friend today, but I really enjoyed it. The ending, the cliffhanger, was insane. This is another one where I had to dive immediately into the sequel, and I read the sequel as an audiobook and as a physical book, so I already had the Audible credit, so I could go straight into it. I really enjoyed it. I think I finished this the night before my honeymoon as well, so a very fond memory. Then we go back to the Hush Hush series because I read Crescendo, which is book 2, and I rated that a solid 2 stars. And you know what, I'm going to put it above This Is How You Lose the Time War because, again, there's 4 books in this series, and this book wasn't bad enough for me to stop reading them. I did read all 4. The main characters are just so flat. They're so stereotypical. It was awful. It was so bad. Honestly, I cannot remember anything that happened in this book. But I know that the end set up for a good sequel, which is what I read next. And the next book I read was Silence, and I rated that one 3 stars. I'm going to put it above Ready Player 2 because Ready Player 2 really did disappoint me. But no, that's the 4-star category. What are we talking about? I'm going to put it above The Atlas 6 but below Never Say Die. No, I'm not. Never Say Die, I can't remember what that was about. I'm going to put it above Never Say Die and below End of Burning, because what I liked about this book, and this is mildly spoilery if you've not read any of Hush Hush and you're interested, but they do this thing where they wipe the main character's memory and she has to kind of remember things as you go along. So it's that there's a word for the technique where the reader knows more than the character on the page, but I thought that was really interesting and well done. Because not well done because they're still only rated at 3 stars and I think the series is crap. I thought it was clever. It was something a little bit interesting that gave me a little bit of hope that the series might redeem itself. But then I read Finale, and that was my first 1-star read of the year. It was absolute trash. The characters were non-existent. They were just stereotypes. They were bland, they were boring. The whole romance element was ridiculous. Even the fantasy element was ridiculous. The whole thing was awful. I read that on my honeymoon, and honestly I kind of wish I hadn't. So after Finale I moved on to one of the physical books that I took on my honeymoon, and it was the May Book Club pick. So I think this was my pick. Yeah, I chose this book, and I chose It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, because Colleen Hoover is such a popular author in like book charts, not on Book Talk. Everyone on Book Talk hates Colleen Hoover, but she is commercially successful. And I rated this book 4 stars, and I'm going to put it above Ready Player 2 and above Secret Weapon. Yeah, I'm going to put it between the 2 Alex Rider books. I've really enjoyed it. I know some people, and I've said this in Vlogmas before, and I'll say it again, I know some people criticise it because they think it trivialises domestic abuse, which is quite a heavy topic that is quite a main theme throughout the book. Personally, And I have no experience with domestic abuse, so I can't speak on this from a position of experience. But I think saying that this writing trivializes domestic abuse, I think belittles people that go through domestic abuse that looks like this. I don't think the book is trying to say that this is the worst it can get, because there is much more serious and worse, for want of a better word, scenarios that people can go through. But people can go through relationships that look like this as well, and I think saying that it's trivial belittles those. So I really did enjoy this book. I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed how they grew and who they became, sorry. The only reason I rated it 4 stars is because some of the topics were super heavy, so I couldn't enjoy it in the same way that I can enjoy other romance books. But that leads me on to, I did read the sequel, It Starts With Us, and I rated that 5 stars, and I'm going to put it above Nightshade. It Starts With Us took everything that I enjoyed about It Ends With Us and just made it light and fluffy, and it was fun, and it was the romance that I think the characters really deserved. I really enjoyed it. I had a lovely time. The next book, however, is very, very different. I read Groovy Greeks because I was on holiday in Greece and it felt thematically appropriate. I didn't give it a rating because it felt like a weird one to give a rating, but I think if I'm looking at it in the context of these other books, I'm going to put it above the Atlas 6, because I did enjoy it. I had a great time, I learned some stuff, but at the end of the day it's a horrible histories book. And then I read God's Behaving Badly by Marie Phillips, which I also rated 3 stars. This one I think I would have enjoyed if it weren't for the couple of random and completely unnecessary comments about sexual assault. I just found they made me feel really uncomfortable, so I'm going to put this below Hush Hush just because those comments made me so uncomfortable. The other book that I rated 3 stars on my honeymoon was this book that I reread, and this book is one that I absolutely adored as a teenager, but that's Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell, and I just didn't enjoy it. I thought they were quite whiny as characters. They were stereotypical teenagers, and this was kind of my first experience of really consciously realising that I'm too old for YA. All the things that I found relatable and enjoyable about that book when I was a teenager are all the things I found irritating about it reading it as someone who was 26 at the time. So I think that's going to go at the bottom of 3 stars, just because it was disappointing as much as it was that I didn't enjoy the book, and it was a stark reminder of how old I am. Then I read These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I rated this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to put it above Secret Weapon but below It Ends With Us, because this is one of the books where the sequel ruined it. I did really enjoy this book. I thought the characters were really good. I don't generally enjoy the love triangle trope, and it was really obvious who she was going to end up with, but it took a turn and it didn't go the way I thought it would, so that kept me engaged. But then when I read These Twisted Bonds, which is the sequel, I was like, where has all the characterization gone? The main character just became an absolute stereotype. I was like, excuse me, where has her personality gone? She just didn't have a character anymore, so I rated it 3 stars. Honestly, I think that was generous. I'm going to put it below The Atlas Paradox. Then when I was back from my honeymoon, I finally finished The Golden Enclaves, which is the last book in the Scholarmance series that started with The Deadly Education and then The Last Graduate. I also rated this one 4 stars, and I think I'm going to put it below A Deadly Education because I did enjoy it, but it wasn't in the school setting anymore. I hope that's not too spoilery to say. I did think it was interesting, and actually it really did help the world building that the story went beyond the school, but it was just a bit slower and it took a while for things to make sense. The next book I read was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, and I rated this 5 stars. I'm going to put it at the bottom of 5 stars just because reading the 2 sequels this year destroyed my love for this book, but we'll get to that. I really enjoyed it. I love the Grumpy Sunshine trope. It's hard for me to look back on this one fondly because I hated the sequels so much, but we'll get to that. The next book I read was the June book club pick, which I'm pretty sure my partner picked because it has the word fuck in the title, but it is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. And this one, I think on the one hand I want to put it above Ready Player One, on the other hand I don't. They're so hard to compare because The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is a non-fiction. Technically I think it's self-help. whereas Ready Player One is obviously a dystopian sci-fi, so they're really difficult to compare. But actually, I think I'm going to put it in the six star tier, because when I finished reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, I wanted to immediately turn back to page 1 and start making notes, highlighting passages, tabbing things, and it's the first book I've ever wanted to engage with on that level. So actually, yeah, I'm going to put it at 6 star. Then we go back to Knock 'Em Out with Things We Hide from the Light, and I rated that 2 stars. I'm going to put it below One Last Stop. No, I'm not. Yeah. I'm going to put it below One Last Stop because originally I did rate One Last Stop higher and then I talked myself out of it. And at least in One Last Stop the characters remained true to themselves. But in Things We Hide from the Light, they all just became caricatures and stereotypes. Knox and Naomi from book 1 just weren't people anymore. They were just like pieces of paper, and everyone became so stereotypical, and it was so long and so boring, and I just really didn't enjoy it. Next I read All That She Can See by Carrie Hope Fletcher, which I rated 3 stars. It was a bit confusing for me because the narrative felt a little bit like it was written for a middle grade audience, but then it had sexual references and swearing, and it just felt really disjointed. The magic system could have been really interesting, but for me it just screamed middle grade. I feel like the whole thing tonally just needed a bit more work because it didn't make sense to me at all. Carrie Hope Fletcher as an author is really hit and miss for me, but in terms of where I'm going to put it in the 3 star rating, I'm going to put it above Silence because I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Silence, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Anna Burning, so that's that. Then I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow Tomorrow, which was a 4 star book. This is the only kind of literary fiction that I've actually enjoyed this year. It made me think that, maybe I can enjoy this genre. So in terms of 4 star, I think I'm going to put it above Icebreaker. Now I'm going to put it above The Giver of Stars. I enjoyed it more than The Giver of Stars. Oh, is it going to go? There it is. I did really enjoy it. It was fun. I thought it was a really interesting take on a relationship that wasn't a romantic relationship. I really enjoyed the element of friendship. I do think most of the characters were incredibly irritating, but I think that was the point. Then I read Gates of Thread and Stone, which was an audiobook that I picked up on Audible. I must have got it for free because there's no way I would have spent a credit on this. But I rated it 2 stars. I think the audiobook was the thing that really made me not enjoy this, because the narrator just sounded like they were trying to be a 10-year-old boy from a Nickelodeon show, and it was really off-putting. It was a really cool premise that was not badly executed, but the audiobook absolutely destroyed it for me. I think I'm going to put it above Crescendo but below Things We Hide from the Light. I think I'm happy with putting that there. The next book I read was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, which I rated 4 stars, which also puts it on the list of one of my most disappointing reads of 2023, because the first 2 Ali Hazelwood books I read, I absolutely devoured. I love The Love Hypothesis. Love on the Brain pulled me out of a reading slump in 2022, but Love Theoretically I just found was too sciencey, and there was so much that I had to just let go over my head that I was confused by. And I just found Elsie as a protagonist a little bit irritating. I think I'm going to put it between Secret Weapon and Ready Player 2. Down with my other disappointing book. Because I did enjoy it. It's an Ali Hazelwood book. Of course I enjoyed it. It's basically the same as her other books, but I just found the main character more irritating. Then I read an absolutely fantastic non-fiction book. This was the year of non-fiction. This is the most non-fiction I've read probably since I was at school. And I've still not read a lot of non-fiction, don't get me wrong, but the next book I picked up was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. The writing style of the book was something that I found really difficult to comprehend when I was just reading with my eyes. So I picked it up as an audiobook, and that made it so much easier for me to engage with. I felt like I was listening to a documentary, and I just lapped it up. I absolutely adored it. I think I read it in less than a week. I started by listening to it on a long drive, but then also read it with my eyes. I started co-reading it. I really enjoyed it. I rated it 5 stars. Again, it's a difficult one to rank because non-fiction is so hard to compare to fiction, but I think I'm actually going to put it just below The Bride Test, because it's the kind of book that I think is really important. It's not just a good read, but it's an important read, and it made me open my eyes to how much I don't know about the history of racism. The next book I read was a stereotypical contemporary romance, but it was actually like a found family romance, and it was really sweet. I rated it 4 stars. It's called Adult Assembly Required. It's one that I picked up, I think it was in the 3 for £6 at the work. I think I'm actually going to put it quite high. I'm actually going to put it at the top of 4 stars, which has surprised me because I didn't think I enjoyed it that much, but now I can remember the plot quite vividly, I can remember the characters quite vividly, and I finished this back in June, so the fact that I can remember it so vividly I think says quite a lot about how much I enjoyed this book. The found family was really sweet, the romance was really sweet, all of it was just a really lovely read. Then we have what I believe is my first ever classic that I've chosen to read as an adult. I read Animal Farm and I rated it 4 stars. I did think it was clever, I did think it was interesting. I think I'm going to put it between It Ends With Us and These Hollow Vows, which is somewhere that Animal Farm by George Orwell has never been before. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I listened to it as an audiobook. I didn't realise it was a novella before I started reading it, so I read it really quickly. Either way, the next book I read was The Infinite by Laurie M. Lee, which is the sequel to Gates of Thread and Stone, which, as you remember, is the book I described as being read by a Nickelodeon character down here. I really didn't want to read The Infinite. I had no intention of reading this sequel. But then it was on Kindle Unlimited and I was like, well, I might as well. It's free, right? I know I pay for Kindle Unlimited, but in my head it's free. So I read The Infinite, and it turns out when you take away the narrator that sounds like an 8-year-old boy, it's a much more enjoyable story. There was kind of a subtle magic system that felt really well integrated that almost didn't feel like magic. I liked the main character a lot more. I liked the secondary and peripheral characters a lot more. I thought it was really interesting. And I did really enjoy it. I rated it 4 stars. I think I'm going to put it above Secret Weapon, but below These Hollow Vows. Yeah, I'm happy with that. The next book I read was one out of my TBR jar, and it's a book that I've had since I was a teenager. And it's called Icons by Margaret Stoll. It's a dystopian kind of sci-fi-esque YA kids with superpowers book. And I thought it was really good. The sequel is on my Amazon wish list, and I think that says everything you need to know. I rated it 4 stars. I do want to read the sequel. I don't currently own the sequel, but I haven't rushed to buy it. So in terms of a 4-star read, I thought the world building was really good. I'm going to put it above Russian Roulette. The next book I read was another book club pick. I think it was my choice actually. I've read The Butterfly Line by Michael Morpurgo, which is a children's book that I seem to have completely escaped when I was a child. And I rated this one 5 stars, but not necessarily because I really enjoyed it, but because I can see how it's so culturally significant and how it is going to be a book that remains important, you know, for the rest of time. It's the kind of book that I can envision myself reading to children if I have them. And that's why I rated it 5 stars. I'm going to put it above Things We Never Got Over because, as we learnt from Things We Hide from the Light, my opinion of this book has been skewed, but I didn't have the same emotional connection with The Butterfly Line as I did the rest of the books that I rated 5 stars or 6 stars. So it's towards the bottom of the list, but I did really enjoy it, and I was really glad that I had the opportunity to read it, because if I didn't read it with the wedding library, I wouldn't have read it in my adult life. The next book I read was Gilded Cage, because Gilded Cage by Vic James, which is the first book in the Dark Gifts series. I bought book 2 in the series, which is called Tarnished City, when I was a teenager, when I went to this bargain bookstore, and I didn't realise it was book 2. And all these years I've been waiting for a reason to buy book 1, and then I realised it was on Kindle Unlimited. So I downloaded it, I read it, and I rated it 4 stars. I thought it had fantastic world building. I thought the magic system was really interesting. I liked the division between those with magic and those without magic, and the kind of, it was one of those fantasy books that has a really interesting political element, and I really love political fantasy. I hate politics in real life. Political fantasy I can get behind. This 4-star book I'm going to put, I might break up the Scholomance, because I enjoyed this more than A Deadly Education. But we go straight on to, I read Tarnished City because I owned it physically, and I honestly can't really remember the difference between book 2 and book 3. Oh, I can. There's a huge thing that happens at the end of book 1, and then book 2 is kind of the consequences of that setting up for book 3. I know it looks like it's getting lower and lower, but it's just because I can't remember the details. I'm going to put it there because I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Animal Farm, but I remember more about It Ends With Us than I do Tarnished City. And whilst reading those physical books, I finished the audiobook of A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, which is the beginning of the Hades and Persephone series, which I've explained about 3 million times on the internet. Hades and Persephone are a Greek couple. It's a Greek story retelling. A Touch of Darkness is the first in a trilogy told from Persephone's perspective. There is a companion trilogy told from Hades' perspective, and they kind of interlink, and they will all come to the conclusion in a book called A Touch of Chaos, which is coming out in 2024. That's all I'm going to say. So, A Touch of Darkness, I rated 4 stars. I thought it really set up. I've never read a Hades and Persephone story before this one. I now know it's a really popular couple that people retell. Such an ancient story. It can be difficult to balance which bits you're going to modernise and which bits are going to be left as a historical element, and I thought that was done really well. I rated it 4 stars. I definitely want to put it above These Hollow Vows. I think I'm going to put it above Russian Roulette but below Icons. The next 2 I can talk about together. I reread Heartstopper Volume 3 and Volume 4 ahead of Series 2 of the show coming out on Netflix. I maybe incorrectly assumed that Series 2 would also cover 2 of the books because Series 1 covered Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the books. I think I'm going to put them below Ready Player One just because, again, Ready Player One really took me by surprise and these were rereads, so I knew what I was getting from them. Then I finally finished Book 3 in the Dark Gifts trilogy, Bright Ruin. I think it was really exciting and it was really well paced, and again, it was another element of fantasy politics that was done really well, but I remember being really disappointed by the ending. I'm just going to put it above Tarnished City because I really loved the political element, but the ending was really disappointing. Then again, with continuing series, I read A Touch of Ruin, which is the second book in the Persephone perspective in the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. I can't remember what happened in this one. I still rated it 4 stars, but I cannot differentiate it from Book 3. So I'm going to put it below Love Theoretically but above Ready Player 2. But next we have another reread. I did quite well with rereading this year, and I've reread Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston before the film came out on Amazon, and this one goes straight into the 6-star category. I absolutely adore this story. I love the protagonist. I actually do like the political element of this story because it is kind of like a fake American politics. It's like a parallel timeline if Donald Trump hadn't got into power, which is a fantastic world to live in. I wish I was there. I just love Alex and Henry. Then I finished listening to 1984 by George Orwell. I really didn't enjoy 1984. Again, I can appreciate it for what it is as a classic, but it just wasn't a classic for me. I'm going to rate it above The Curious Incident because I absolutely hate The Curious Incident, but really didn't enjoy 1984. Then I read the book club pick for August, which my husband chose, which was Codename Villain L by Luke Jennings, which is the book that inspired Killing Eve, the TV show. And I rated this one 4 stars as well. I was really surprised. I didn't think I'd enjoy, I think it's technically crime, also a bit thriller-y. But yeah, I really did enjoy it. I'm going to put it above The Giver of Stars because I'm literally going on. Did I enjoy it more than Icons? Yes. Did I enjoy it more than Icebreaker? Yes. Did I enjoy it more than The Giver of Stars? I think so, but less than Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So that's where I'm putting it. Then we get into Twisted Love by Ana Huang. And I rated it 1 star because I think it is absolute trash. Granted, I think it's slightly better trash than Finale, but it's awful. Like, I was reading it and I was honestly surprised that anyone enjoys this. I don't want to be offensive because I'm sure Ana Huang is talented because she's written loads of books and got book deals and published them, like traditionally published books. But I thought this was worse than a lot of fan fiction I've read. And I spent a lot of my teenage years reading fan fiction. I really don't understand because I honestly think it's really badly written. I've written off Ana Huang as an author forever. No amount of FOMO can make me want to read another Ana Huang book. So let's get on to talking about a book that I did enjoy much more. The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman, which is the second book in the Thursday Murder Club. I thought this book was so heartwarming and heart-wrenching in equal manner. I think it's worth mentioning that if mentions of dementia or losing someone to dementia could be triggering for you, then this is not a book that you should read. But if that's not a trigger for you, it's so eye-opening and sweet and heart-wrenching. I really enjoyed it. And then because it is the Thursday Murder Club, there is a crime element. I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was wonderful. I rated it 4 stars, and I'm going to put it there. Then I read A Touch of Malice to finish off the Persephone trilogy of the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. And I rated this one 3 stars. I just felt like it was a bit like smut for the sake of smut. And then I think, if I remember correctly, in the last 10% there was actually a decent bit of plot, and there was a really good cliffhanger that made me want to pre-order the book that's coming out next year, which is Dual Perspective and finishes both trilogies. But the lead up to all that was an unnecessary amount of smut. I rated it 3 stars. Looking at the other books I've rated 3 stars, it's definitely above Silence. Why is Silence so high up? Silence is going to go below Never Say Die, because it's not fair to Alex Rider to put Silence above it. I think I'm going to put it next to Silence, actually. There's A Touch of Malice, though All That She Can See is a bit high. This is why I need to stop looking at it, because I'm going to start rearranging books. Then I went back into the world of the Thursday Murder Club with The Bullet That Missed. This was actually my least favourite in the trilogy, and I was speaking to my husband's granddad about it. My granddad-in-law, if that's a thing, and he agreed that The Bullet That Missed was just not that good. It kind of went a bit off-piste. It wasn't as engaging. For me, I finished reading The Man Who Died Twice and went into reading The Bullet That Missed, both as audiobooks, on the same drive. So I finished the second book and literally 3 seconds later went into the third book. And the second book ends with an interview between the voice actor and Richard Osman, the author, where they talk about how he would love her to come back and do book 3, and then book 3 is narrated by someone else, and that really threw me off, and I didn't enjoy the narrator for book 3 as much as I enjoyed the narrators for book 1 and 2, so that threw me off as well. The story was okay, but I didn't love it, so I'm going to put it above All That She Can See. The next book I read was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes, which I think came out of my TBR jar, but I was really grateful for it too, because I've seen clips of the film all over TikTok, all over Facebook, and I really should watch the film now. But because I'd seen previews of the film, I was picturing Sam Claflin and Emilia Clarke as the protagonists, and honestly, I've not even seen the film, but that casting is perfect. I rated the story 4 stars, kind of for the same reason that I rated It Ends With Us 4 stars. It was just so heavy and it was so sad. The ending was so sad, and I'm a basic girl that just likes a happy ending, so I just couldn't give it that 5 stars because it was so sad. I think I'm gonna put it between The Giver of Stars and Icebreaker. Then onto another book that I thoroughly didn't enjoy in a series that absolutely killed the enjoyment of the first book, Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score, the 3rd book in the Knock 'Em Out series. I enjoyed this even less than Things We Hide From the Light. I'm going to put it between 1984. Actually, I'm going to move 1984 up. Yeah, actually 1984 can go up here because it is a classic and it deserves better than all of these. And remaining in the bad patch, the next book I read was my book club pick for September, and it was Good Vibes, Good Life by Vex King. And I'm afraid I do not feel the good vibes, and perhaps that means I won't have a good life, but these good vibes are not my vibes. And I rated this one 2 stars as well. I'm going to put it, again, non-fiction is so hard to rank amongst fiction books. I think I'm going to put it above Crescendo, because Crescendo was trash, and at least there were elements of Gates of Thread and Stone and Things We Hide From the Light that I did like. Good Vibes, Good Life is absolutely a case of, I thought it was terrible, but I can understand why some people thought it was good. Now we're getting to the end of September. The next book I finished was the audiobook for Circe by Madeline Miller, and I rated this 4 stars. It's another Greek retelling. I was really on my Greek hype this year. I really enjoyed it. It took me a little while to get into it, but also I think the kind of time that I was spending trying to get into the book was the time where Circe was trying to figure out who she was as a person. So it's not that the character wasn't well established, it's that the character hadn't established who she was within herself yet. And in hindsight, I think that's really clever. I thought it was really, really well written, and I totally understand the hype on Madeline Miller now. I think I'm now basing this on how likely I am to reread these books, and I would definitely reread Adult Assembly Required above Circe. I think it's going to go below The Man Who Died Twice and above Gilded Cage. But the next book I read, Fourth Wing, and I rated it 5 stars. But I did think it was a good fantasy book. I love the world building. I thought the world building was so well done that I could literally dive into the page and become part of the story. I really, really enjoyed it. The writing of some of the dialogue I found was a bit cringy. I did think it was a little bit too long. Some of the characterization was a bit awkward. But I read this book because my husband read it and he absolutely adored it. So a lot of the positive associations I have is because of that association I have with him reading it. I am going to leave it in the 5-star category. I'm going to put it above Things We Never Got Over and The Butterfly Lion and Nightshade. I'm going to put it above It Starts With Us and below Heartstopper, because it definitely doesn't give me the same giddy feeling of kicking my feet that Heartstopper did. But I do love these characters. The next book I read was The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, which was another book club pick, and I rated this one 2 stars because, again, I can see how and why it's a classic, but I just didn't enjoy it. I think it's better written than Crescendo and Good Vibes, Good Life. And I'm going to put it below... Actually, I'm going to put it above 1984 because I did enjoy it more... Come on, I want you to go... I did enjoy it more than 1984, but I still didn't enjoy it. Then we go back to Scarlet St. Clair and back to the Hades and Persephone series with the first book in the Hades trilogy, A Game of Fate. I rated this one 3 stars because I thought it very much could have just been a novella. A lot of the scenes were exactly the same as the ones in A Touch of Darkness, but told from Hades' perspective. But Hades wasn't a very guarded character, so I feel like there wasn't really anything new to be added from his perspective. There was his own element of plot that wasn't included in A Touch of Darkness, which, like I said, could have been a nice novella, but almost all of the scenes with Persephone were really repetitive because there was nothing new added to them. So I rated it 3 stars because, again, I did enjoy the series, but I don't think Hades' perspective added anything. I'm going to rate it above All That She Can See because the writing was better, in my opinion. The next book I loved so much, I'm genuinely considering putting on the 6-star list. I read and absolutely devoured Wildfire, which is the sequel to Icebreaker. I rated this 5 stars. I absolutely adored it. I love the characters. I love the connection to the first book, but also the fact that it was set at a summer camp gave it a chance to be a little bit more removed, and I absolutely adored it. They were so sweet, they were so cute. It still had all the elements of a new adult book that I love. It made me kick my little feet. I read the whole thing in under 48 hours. I read like 250 pages in one day, which is a lot for me. I think it's on the 6-star list. I think it's tentatively on the 6-star list because I only read it a couple of months ago, but if this stands the test of time, this might be one of my favourite books of all time. I loved Wildfire so much. Russ and Aurora are just the sweetest, and I want to protect them with my whole heart. The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman was brilliant. I thought it was better than The Man Who Died Twice. Actually, I'm going to put it next to The Man Who Died Twice. It was fantastic. The crime element was brilliant, as all the Thursday Murder Club books are. The subplot that's more emotional and more personal to these characters was so sweet, so heart-wrenching and so realistic. It was a book that my therapist recommended that maybe I didn't listen to while I was driving because the emotional parts might have got to me too much. I think that says everything that needs to be said about this book. I really enjoyed it. Then I read my first ever Illumicrate subscription book. This is when I finally got off the wait list and got my Illumicrate subscription, and I was so excited about it. And then I received a book that I'd seen loads of hype for on TikTok that people were really excited about. And I read A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it, but I did only rate it 3 stars. I thought it was a bit surface level. Again, it kind of touches on, even though the genre isn't described as literary, I would definitely call it a literary book, where it's a bit pretentious, a bit let you fill in the gaps kind of thing, and for me, I just don't find that engaging or enjoyable particularly. There were elements of fantasy that I thought were intriguing but not very well explored. The characterizations I thought were okay. It was just kind of okay. I think my 3-star ranking has a middle place where All That She Can See was on the borderline of being a badly written book. So yeah, we're going to leave it there. The next book I finished was the audiobook for Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which is the first book in the Legendborn cycle, and I rated this 3 stars as well. In hindsight, I know it's because the whole book is set up for a larger series, and I didn't really know that going into it. I thought it was going to be more plot based than it was, and in hindsight the setup was important and it's good, but it was a bit boring to read, and it was really long. The audiobook was nearly 19 hours long. I did enjoy it more than A Study in Drowning, but I didn't enjoy it as much as Game of Fate. Then at the beginning of November I read Iron Flame, which is the sequel to Fourth Wing. My husband and I tried to read this at the same time, but he reads faster than me, so he would let me read and then he would catch up, and then he'd go, oh my god, and I'd go, wait, I've not got there yet. I rated it 4 stars just because the first half really did drag. It took me ages to read the first half, but then I'd say maybe the last quarter was really plot heavy. It was really fast paced. It was so good. There were so many things that all fell together and suddenly made sense, and then there was twists and turns, and it was so good. I really enjoyed it. Not as much as Fourth Wing. It is in the 4-star category, and I think I'm going to put it above Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, because I did enjoy these Scholomance books more than Iron Flame, but I did really enjoy Iron Flame. The next book I read was the first Afterlight book I got, which was Cleek Cute by Meryl Wilsner, which I rated 4 stars, but honestly I think it's going to have to go at the top of 4 stars, if not the end of 5 stars, because I love this book so much. The representation was fantastic in terms of the LGBTQ representation, but then there was some surprise disability neurodiversity rep that I really wasn't expecting, and I thought was brilliantly done. I thought it was really fantastically written, and I've spoken so positively about this book that I genuinely think I might need to bump it up to 5 stars. I think the only thing holding me back is that it's about soccer players and I don't care about football. The next book I read was The Cruel Prince, and I rated this one 4 stars as well. I think I would put this, I'm going to put it between Tarnished City and Animal Farm, because I did enjoy it and I am going to read the rest of the series. I just haven't got around to it yet, but it wasn't top of the list, you know. I did go out and buy the rest of the series maybe a week after I finished it, but I haven't started reading them yet. And I think that says enough about how I enjoyed the series, and I will read the sequels, but I haven't rushed to read them yet. Then I read Ali Hazelwood's YA debut, Check and Mate, which I would argue is new adult rather than young adult, but I don't think new adult has been established enough as a genre yet. But because it is skewed towards a younger audience, it was really easy to read. I really enjoyed the character dynamics. There was still an element of the spice that we know from Ali Hazelwood's adult books, but it was closed door because it is based on new adult / young adult characters, and I really enjoyed it, so I rated it 4 stars. I think I need to put it somewhere around Icebreaker. It's kind of the same vibes. I enjoyed it more than Icebreaker, so actually I'm going to put it there. The next book I read was another new release. It was Heartstopper Volume 5, and this was another instant 5 stars. I just thought it was wonderful. I thought it gave Nick and Charlie everything they needed, and it really progressed them as characters, and it was perfect. It was so good. I'm really excited and nervous for Volume 6 because it's going to be the end of Nick and Charlie's story, but oh my god, I just love them so much. Then the next audiobook I finished was Wings of Ebony by JL, and I rated this one 2 stars. I think I'm going to put it there. It was fine. It was just the magic system was the best part of the book, actually. The characters were I didn't really care about any of them. I definitely didn't like the protagonist. There wasn't much of a plot. It was all a bit wishy-washy. Then I read my one and only Christmas book of the year so far, Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey. My first ever Tessa Bailey book, and I really enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars. I'm going to pop it up there just so I can see, and then I think I'm going to put it... I'm actually going to put this quite high up, I think. Don't get me wrong, it was a really stereotypical romance book, but from a festive romance book, that's kind of all you want. I wanted an easy cheesy Christmas romance, and that's exactly what I got. It fulfilled the brief. So I'm going to put it up here, which may be a little bit unhinged. The last book on my list that I've read in 2023 so far, and that's My Policeman by Bethan Roberts, and I rated it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. It did borderline on literary fiction, but in a way that I thought was really accessible, and it helped me kind of... It was like spoon-fed literary fiction. It helped me to understand without giving me all the answers. I don't know if I want to rate it more highly because I've finished it so recently and I remember it so well, but also it covered some really difficult topics, and I think it covered them really, really well. I think it's going to sit just above Circe, but below the man... No, it's going above The Man That Died Twice. And below The Last Devil to Die. Yeah, that's the right place for My Policeman. And that's it. I've tier ranked every single book I read in 2023. But if you've sat through this whole video of me talking about all the books I read this year, you are a real trooper. Thank you so much for watching. I wish I had something more insightful to say now that I've finished making this list, but I don't. I hope you're having a great day. I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Bye!